Hello, everybody. This is the Great Johannes speaking. I'm going to do another live podcast for the next hour or so. You're welcome to join me, and you can keep it interactive. If you want to write me some comments, I will read them. Usually, I will respond if there's something interesting to say. Let me set up my chat box. Yeah, it's visible, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk about lots of things, but as usual, since it always takes a few minutes for people to pour into the comment section anyway to start the interaction, I nowadays put up. Hold on, let me adjust my camera for a moment. Right, something like that. I put up this picture. This is a painting by Thomas Cole. You may know Thomas Cole from that series of paintings about the decline of civilization, or what is it called? The Course of Empire. Yeah, we're going to talk about the next pope as well during this session. I just got started, and usually I will do a whole hour. I'm playing some Doomer music in the background. I hope it's not too freaking loud. Um, I I like this painting. It's called The Architect's Dream. Let me get out of the way for a moment if you can see it. There's actually some. Oh, you can't see it. Oh, here, over here. Do you see this? There's a fellow over there. There's a guy, a little guy over there. He's dreaming. If this is quite a detailed painting, actually. If you would see it in, you can go to Google Arts, for example, or if you would see it in the museum, it's probably quite big. The detail is interesting because the buildings are huge. They're life bigger than life. You see in the background also this bigger than life pyramid, but at the same time you see this Gothic cathedral here on the right. You have this mix of Roman and also of Egyptian architectural styles. What if architects in the Western world were now simply allowed to do whatever they wanted, and we invited these guys who like making this stuff to our front lines, basically, to start redesigning and reshaping our world? Wouldn't this be beautiful to have a view from your apartment that looks like this? Wouldn't that be completely insane? Yeah, the Gothic cathedral, right? Uh, So that's what it's called. The Goths were originally a bunch of Germanics who got into Spain, right? The Gothics, the Visigoths, and the Visigoths and the other ones, the Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths. Yeah. Well, we're not exactly talking about Gothic girls. This is a bit different. This is a Germanic tribe who conquered Rome. They sacked Rome under King Alaric in like around the year 500 AD or so. Right. Hey, you follow my content trail for a long time. Can we talk? No, I'm not gay. So I'm doing a live stream here, and you're welcome to comment here. But I'm not interested in doing dual interviews or whatever now. I don't see why. So this is Thomas Cole's painting. Like I said, you should look at the original, or you can go find it on Google Arts and you can zoom into it. It's got massive detail. It's very, very beautiful. The people here are tiny, like as small as tiny little ants over here. And so I say that because you want to talk to me. You popped up in my interview thing. Why would you do that? That's weird. Like, I don't want to do that, see? So I want to talk about the next pope. I want to talk about Boomer Leftists, right? It's like this. Imagine, right, that you really believe that the institutions that we've built in the Western world, our democracy, our rule of law, our free market, our welfare systems, right, all these institutions, our interest in things like equality, are things like we should have racial equality and religious freedom, right? Let's call these institutions, right? And our education system and our feminism and making men and women equal. Even though in countries where you have the most freedoms between the sexes, you also have the largest differences, such as in Sweden. Because once you allow men and women to pick their own professions, guess what they do? The women go into very feminine professions and the men go into very masculine professions because that's what they want to do naturally. And so you have the situation where countries like Sweden that are extremely progressive have the largest sex differences in the modern Western world. But here's the thing. I was watching this interview on X, and there's this young man arguing, explaining, and we're talking about Britain for a moment, explaining that young people, and myself included, I'm not even young anymore, are not willing to die for the diversitopian democracies that we built in the Western world. Because what happens when you make London 37% native British and like nearly 70% brown and diverse, right? The boomers who did this are 70 years old now, 70, 75 years old, right? Those boomers, when they used to live in London, when they were 30, 45 years ago, right? They were living in a London that was 90% white, 95% white, right? It was British. It was English, right? None of that exists anymore, but in their boomer minds, they still think it does. They still think that that's how the world is as it was 45 years ago, right? This is what happens when old people grow old. Most of them are unable now to adjust their thinking to the times, to the present. So you get this situation where these boomers who allowed diversity to come in, who allowed Muslims and Hindus to flood into British towns, but also in Germany. It's the same thing in France and the same thing in the Netherlands and Belgium and whatnot, right? They pour these people into our countries, right? And then they assume that black people, brown people, whatever's coming to Britain instantly will want to adopt the same things that we have here. They will care about our freedom of religion. They will love democracy, because they don't have these things at home. And that's true, but the conclusion that they will want it is wrong. They may not have religious freedom in Saudi Arabia, but when Arabs come to Britain, they will use our religious freedom to destroy Christianity, right? They may not have democracy in places like Angola, but when Angolans come to Germany, they will use democracy to destroy Germany, right? This is not understood. But I'm telling you, when boomer leftists die out in the next 5 years, when the boomer leftists die, no one will be left behind to care about their stupid institutions whatsoever. No one cares. No one cares about their institutions, right? All this nonsense about equality and diversity and feminism and all that stuff. Once you lose the population that was once susceptible to these ideals, white Western people, once they are gone, you're going to get Islamic Sharia law in London, right? You're not going to get democracy and open borders anymore. Sweden, if Sweden becomes a majority Muslim nation, it won't be called Sweden anymore. It will be called Al-Sverige, yeah? All right? Like Al-Andalus instead of Spain, right? It won't be what you think it needs to be. You may care about climate change very, very much, right? But if 20 years from now, France is a majority Nigerian nation, they won't care about climate anymore, right? The only climate change that has truly perspired is the one where the white people died, right? That's what they mean by climate change. By the way, a lot of times when European powers speak of these great ideals like abolishing slavery or doing climate policy to save the climate, they're actually using this as a cover for something else. In the late 19th century, we're talking the 1880s in Europe, you had Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck from Germany. You had others from England and France coming together at these international conferences where they decided together what to do about Africa. For example, under King Leopold II of Belgium, and I know Africans hate King Leopold, right? They decided how to carve up Congo, how to extract the resources from Congo. So this is in the late 19th century, right? The Europeans finally start, exploiting African resources, but they have a cover. They say to the world, we're going to Africa to abolish slavery. And they really did do that. For example, there was this Englishman, Gordon. He has a statue at Trafalgar Square. He went to South Sudan, that's Eastern Africa, and on camelback in the late 19th century, he went around South Sudan, sacking all the slave markets and arresting all the slave traders. Now, the locals, the Arabs and the blacks, didn't like that, and they called Gordon a Christian crusader. They didn't like the fact that he came to abolish slavery. But what is so deeply interesting is, although the Europeans really did abolish slavery in Africa, they only used that as a cover for the fact that they were coming to exploit African resources, right? So they take the resources out of Africa. Now, think of the whole story we have about climate change. Climate change is what we call a Nazi euphemism. It means something other than what you think it means. Under the cover, under the umbrella of climate change, there's some other really big event that's going to take place in the next 5 to 10 years, which is the reason why we have to believe that the climate is now making you sick. Have you had a depression lately? Oh, climate change. Did you have the flu lately? It's climate change. They're starting to say, ever since COVID ended, the COVID era, right? The coronavirus came to an end because we had to shift our attention to the war in eastern Ukraine now. And now we're going back to basically bullying ordinary citizens with made-up, fantastical fantasy diseases. But this time it's climate change because, people have had enough of taking the jabs for the virus. So now it's going to be climate change. But what's really going to happen, of course, is the whole talk of climate change is a cover for the fact that the boomers in the West are going to die. In the next 5 to 10 years, the whole boomer generation will die out. That's it's like a third of people in the Netherlands. It's like a third of people in Germany. They're going to die in the next 5 years. Okay, but they have massive wealth. That generation, the boomers, they have more wealth than any other generation combined even. They have 3 houses, they got the cars, right? And I know not all boomers are rich, but the rich people are all boomers. That's my point, right? So these boomers, they have houses. When they die, who's going to live in their houses? Now, you might think for a moment that Gen X and generation like Millennials and so on, maybe even Gen Z are going to start inheriting that boomer wealth, finally. But there's a thing called the state, and the state can tax you. So the state, I think, like the USA, this is going to happen in the USA, in Germany, in France, they're going to tax this boomer inheritance to death. They're going to basically seize it because imagine for a moment that a bankrupt nation like France could steal its boomer generation's wealth and then use it, for example, to deploy new infrastructure in Western Africa where France is still very much active, or to fund, for example, the war against Russia. The war against Russia isn't going to end tomorrow. It's going to take the next 20 years, like a sort of slow war, hot phase, slow phase, hot phase, and so on, right? So we're going to witness Western governments attempting to rob those inheritances. They're doing it already in England. You have like the estate tax or the farm tax, where basically they're taxing farmers to death so that farmers are forced to sell up, but they're selling up to the government at reduced prices. Imagine all the things you might be able to do if you had your hands on the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in savings and assets of the boomer generation that's going to die in the next 5 years. Now, that's the climate change they keep talking about, because you could tax that wealth, seize it, right, and then spend it on housing immigrants, spend it on, funding Islam in Britain or so, right? Or you could use it to build infrastructure in Africa and India or wherever you want it, or to build armies, to militarize yourself, to fight against China and so on. So yeah, there's no chance whatsoever that Gen Z and Gen X and so on and millennials are going to inherit their boomer parents' wealth or their boomer grandparents' wealth. There's no chance because it's so much money. All the governments around the world know they need this money. The Western nations know they need this money for other purposes, toward other ends, right? They're going to seize that shit. It's about, so the climate change story is really about preparing white people for their extinction, but mainly we're talking about the extinction, the death of the boomer generation. That's about a third of the population of white people, third of white people. And then the remaining whites will be minorities in their own countries, or at the very least, minorities in every city, in every big city. This brings me back to the stories that I've told you many times before about all our options. Like we could go do like what Orania has done in South Africa. We can go to the subarctic and move our people further north. That's a potential solution. Siberia, whatnot, right? Northern Scandinavia. But those lands are not very fertile at the moment. You would have to wait for actual climate change to happen. If the Arctic regions would become hotter, then we could move there. We could live there. And the other option is, of course, what I prefer nowadays is the full frontal conflict. We just need to go to war, right? Meaning declare war on Islam and be done with it, right? Accept that this is our fate. This is the geopolitical outcome of the European world, is that, yeah, we have these boomer leftists in charge today bringing in all the diversity, but when they're dead, we're stuck with it, right? No one's going to care about the institutions. I just explained that. So what we're dealing with is Europeans either willingly submit to Islam and be colonized and destroyed by Muslims who already live here and the ones who are still coming, right? For example, Turkey might switch allegiance to Russia and they could invade Europe. Algeria is militarizing. Why is Algeria militarizing? It's a North African country. Why are they militarizing? Are they going to do a push together with Turkey and Russia? They're going to invade Europe. The potential is there that the Islamic crescent that surrounds Europe is preparing for a large-scale invasive war of the European lands, especially around that time when the boomers are dying off, which is the next 5 years already. So, okay. So either we submit to Islam willingly, bend over to it, or, right, we accept our fate and we declare war, basically. We go for war. You would end up having a war with Turkey, with Russia. Russia remains an enemy, right? Algeria, the Saudis, the Arabs, whatever, right? And whatever African nation joins in. So it could be a massive, massive war. And you're thinking, well, what chances do we Europeans even have to win a war against Islam and Africa at the same time, and Russia and China? The chances are very small, but it's better to die with pride, right? Better to die like a man than submit like a woman, right? We can't do this. We can't allow ourselves to go down the path of the stupid boomer leftists who have set us up on a path toward extinction, right? In that situation, it would be better to be like the Spartans at the hot gates, at the Battle of Thermopylae, which really happened, by the way, in Greece, where they stopped the Persian hordes from coming in. Or perhaps you've heard of the story of Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg is the Albanian warlord who was first kidnapped as a child, raised as a Muslim, but then he became a Janissary. The Janissary were like mercenaries fighting for the Ottomans because the Ottomans couldn't find warriors among their own people. They had to kidnap warriors from other people, right? So these Janissaries, they were brainwashed. He wakes up from the brainwashing, returns to Albania, Skanderbeg, right? Returns to Albania, and then fights for the Albanian people, for Christianity. He converts back to Christianity, and he drives out the Muslims, and he keeps the Ottomans out of Europe long enough so that the warlords in the rest of Europe can then gather to protect Europe, right? Or, we need to think of this more in terms of how do you want this to end, right? And I foresee the following. Like, I would aim for a shock upset followed by a victory over our arch enemy, which is really Islam. Islam has been waging war on Europe for almost 1400 years. Why wouldn't we pick that fight? But sadly, our leftist globalistic leaders in the Western countries, in Europe, in the UK, even in the US, they prefer mass migrating Muslims in, trying to welcome them in, trying to integrate them, as they call it, integration, because they've abandoned assimilation long ago. They said, no, they can be culturally Muslim, they can be culturally African, no problem. They don't even have to speak our languages, as long as they integrate, which just means pay taxes, get a job, or live off welfare. That's useless, right? So the ideal of integration even has been watered down to the point where people just don't speak your language. It's very many neighborhoods in London are not English anymore. London is not an English city anymore. It simply isn't, right? But the idea that after the whites somehow become a minority, somehow the brown people will all get along, no. Then you'll have wars between the Hindus and the Muslims, because they have wars between Hindus and Muslims, right? There's going to be wars between the Sunni and the Shia Muslims and the Wahhabi Muslims, right? There's going to be a war between all sorts of factions of Africans, the Hutus against the Tutsis, fighting it out in the streets of London and Paris and Berlin and so on. It's all going to fall apart like a gigantic Tower of Babel, right? Right? It's just all going to fall apart. All right. So that was my tantrum, or my speech to introduce everything. Right. So I'm going to be a bit more interactive now. Yeah. Somebody asked me about the thoughts about the Pope, right? The next Pope. You know what I noticed? Pope Francis died on the same day Klaus Schwab, the director of the World Economic Forum, quit his function. Now there's another interim manager for the World Economic Forum. Okay, that's interesting. My first thought was, okay, this Klaus Schwab is now behind the scenes trying to get their globalist pope, a black pope, obviously. Maybe they will pick that guy, Sarah, right? Because he's so based like Kanye, right? But you see what happens, right? Did you see what Kanye happened? Kanye West, he imploded. I'm not even going to talk about it. It's just disgusting. I think he's severely mentally ill. But we don't need this, right? If you had a black pope coming to Rome, which is obviously what the globalists now want, so that they can unite Europe with Africa somehow, right? The European large Christendom population with the African Pope, connecting the Africans to Europe, to create Euro-Africa. I mean, these are all the big geopolitical games being played behind our scenes and over our heads. They never really tell you about this, right? But they want to fuse Africa with Europe. Because there will be a war if we don't. And again, I am the sort of person who prefers the war because, you know, if we have to miscegenate with Africans to win, then we've already lost. Get it? So if in order to defeat the Russians we have to become Muslim, then we've already lost anyway. What the hell are we fighting for? But this is the point. Boomer leftists find it incredibly hard to even imagine that, first of all, the white Western men don't want to fight for these diverse nations anymore. We would rather see Russia overrun Berlin and Paris and clear them all out, right? Than to die in the mud in the suburbs of Moscow fighting Russians there? For what? For LGBT, for the gay pride parade, for a black pope, and for multiculturalism and diversity? No, we don't want any of this. And secondly, to think that the Hindus in England or the blacks in France or the Turks in Germany somehow care to fight for those nations. Of course not. They're not going to fight for those nations. They're going to fight against those nations. Yeah? The second Turkey attacks Europe, the 8 million Turks living in Germany are going to side with their home nation. Then all of a sudden it matters. Then all of a sudden they're not really German anymore. Now they insist they are real Germans unless, of course, Turkey invades Germany. Then they're real Turks again, see? The switcheroo will be instant in a second. Same with the black people living in France, for example. France is the country in Europe that has most black people in it now, right? Because of its West African colonies. I'm not saying there's no reason for it, but I'm saying is those black men, they're not going to fight for France. They're going to fight against the French people, right? Same in England. The Muslims, the Hindus, the Pakistani, hey, they've already raped 1 million white girls. What will they do next, right? If whites become a minority, right? And white girls become a prized possession because they're rare. It's going to be extremely rare to have a pretty blonde, blue-eyed girl. They're going to be nearly extinct, right? So it becomes something to hunt for. And so, well, you can guess what's going to happen, right? Are Mediterraneans white? Why do people always ask me this? Like I'm the CEO of white people. I have to determine. My answer is, if you have to ask me this, then no, then you're not white, right? And why are you spamming this, you know? So which part of the European economic zone do you most want to live in? I don't want to live in any economic zone. I want to live in the fantasy world, in the architect's dream here. It's a painting by Thomas Cole, who also made that series of paintings about the erosion of empire. I think it's a very beautiful painting. We have the potential, the painting is fictional, but we have the potential to build cities that look like this. Now go to Rotterdam, go to places in Western Germany, awful industrial cities, ugly square buildings, ugly, ugly glass steel. It's 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 soulless. It's killing us from within. People are dying. There's a reason why people are so depressed who live in big cities. Most of them never see any nature or trees, right? It's unhealthy. You don't see any animals. You don't see cows. You don't see deer, wild deer running around. You don't see the rabbits. You don't see the badgers and the beavers, right? The birds. You hardly see life. We're not supposed to live so detached from the rest of the world. So no, I don't want to live in an economic zone. I want to live in an ethno state, a traditionalist ethno state that also has no reason not to defend itself, right? No excuses, because we are going to fight for something, the things that make ourselves healthy and strong again. We're going to focus on bringing about our talents, our competencies, right? We're going to make ourselves spiritually invincible. And then, of course, it won't matter. If a war comes to us, we'll fight that war, right? We're not going to submit or surrender. We're not going to give up. We're not going to run away. We're going to make people regret picking a fight with us. That's what it's supposed to be like. Yeah. All right, I'm going to focus a bit more on your comments because I think I started with my, my monologue. I was talking the whole time. So let's see where it's going, right? Yeah, the UK will collapse first. I think France is going to go bankrupt first. Right. Then France, Sweden. Yeah, you may be very right about that. Yeah. So which European country? Yeah, France. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So someone says here in Dutch that they think that their parents want them to work in a big corporation, but you want to live in the mountains somewhere, and they call it unrealistic. Yeah, it really isn't. It may actually be the future. Now I live in northwestern Europe. We have flatlands, but the idea that the big cities might go extinct, that corporations might not survive the next 10 years is not unrealistic. Right? Ultimately, what you can do, something I did in my life when I was a bit younger, 10 years ago, I packed up my stuff and I went on a hiking trip around Europe, and I ended up in northern Sweden called the Kungsleden Trail. You can take the train there. It's called the Arctic Express train because you actually move north of the Arctic Circle. Northern Sweden, all the way north, is above the Arctic Circle. So you're on the North Pole, basically. And you can start this in the summertime, of course. You can also go in the wintertime if you bring skis, but it's safer to do it in the summertime, say in July. And you spend like 2 weeks or so out in the wild. I saw deer and moose and so on. I saw all sorts of animals. You get closer to nature. You reconnect with yourself there. Your body adapts to this. It's going to be a bit, even in July, it will be a bit cold there, maybe like 5 degrees or 10 degrees at most Celsius, right? And it's such a wonderful experience because you will meet people on the trail. You won't be alone, but you can be alone. So you can go wherever you want, right? Bring a map, bring a compass, or follow the trail. And what is so great about this kind of hiking experience, if you do it for 2 weeks, your mind completely resets. You really do change. It transforms you. It's like a pilgrimage. That's what it was. For me, it was a sort of spiritual pilgrimage. But instead of going to Mecca, I go to northern Sweden, right? Christian conservatives, they go to Auschwitz to check out the concentration camp. That's their pilgrimage. Very negative. But no, do a positive spiritual pilgrimage for yourself and go somewhere. Go hike through nature. Maybe go hunting or something, right? Do something nice, right? Rage baiting. What are you talking about? We're almost extincted. Nah. Yeah, we're not. The thing is, we don't need the leftists anymore. And the boomers are old. It's not a problem if we would reduce our numbers by 2/3, and then what remains is a far healthier group of people who are capable and willing to fight for what they believe in. And then we would even have better chances at fighting our enemies. It's really I don't like this doom thinking where we say things, there's nothing we can do about it. Europe is going to hell and that's it. No, we need to always remind ourselves that we decide the future, even when we are a minority faced with a large global majority. Then we still decide how to deal with that. We choose our own attitude, right? Uh, we choose our own attitude. There's this Jewish author who wrote the book The Search for Meaning, but it is a good book. So you can read that book, and it's all about this. It's about, in the face of an insurmountable enemy, you can still change your attitude. And so instead of feeling like a loser, you can still feel like a winner, victor. Be strong, right? No, don't give up, right? Keep pushing back, keep fighting, right? Oh yeah, rage baiting. I get it now. Yeah. Right, Europeans are awesome in warfare. That's the spirit. Those are the positive, uplifting messages we need. We are awesome in war. Some Indian fellow on Twitter or X, he said something like, "Europeans are monsters, genocidal, colonizing, slaving monsters," and I'm like, yeah, like those things don't hurt me anymore. Don't let it bring you down. Don't let it take you down. Accept that people have very negative views of us, but just wear those epithets as badges of honor, I'd say. Right? What will happen to European economies after globalism? Okay, I think we are already deglobalizing anyway. The dollar is losing power in all sorts of regions, because after globalism, you go back to regional empires. And for Europe, that means the return of a Holy Roman Empire, a return of a sort of German empire, the Fourth Reich maybe. Why? Because if globalism collapses, what that really means is that the British and the Americans, who live off trade with the world, they control the world's trade routes, right? Import and export. That is going to be cut off. And then Europe as a regional sphere, you end up having that axis of Germany and Italy, all right, or Germany and France, right? That Romano-Germanic, right? That Roman-German combination. That's just what it will return to now, which isn't a bad thing, And in terms of demographics, I've heard the Romans went to Britain, but they left almost no genetic trace, right? So things happen. It's not impossible for us to very rapidly invest in our own people's birth rates and have nothing to do with all the others, because if society collapses, there are no more laws telling us we have to take care of asylum seekers and immigrants and so on. Technically, we don't have to do that at all anyway. It's just that the way it works is this. Our Western rich people have figured out that they can side with immigrants and the lower classes against the middle class, because the middle class still has wealth, savings, assets. They can still get at that, right? By siding with the lower classes and with the working classes and with the immigrants. But you can also imagine a transformation. You can imagine the middle classes convincing the lower classes that we must together make a stand against our exploitative elites and against the immigrants. This isn't impossible, right? You can have, this is called the populist configuration. All you need is a strongman leader who knows what to do, who is able to inspire and rally the people. And then he can convince his race of people, the middle class, lower class, to stand up for themselves again, and we just carve out a future of our own. And it will be done aggressively because, well, ultimately, violence is the only law, whether you like it or not, We must become Christians, yes, but not with a black pope. Yeah. You like my monologues? Yeah, I do my best to always push forward. I always feel like I have my foot on the brake a little bit because of the speech laws, hate speech laws. Like I never know, like how far can I really speak my mind without being thrown in jail or so, right? But we'll see eventually, right? Right. Yeah, we need to engage in class warfare as well as ethno-nationalism. Yeah, in a way, I suppose. Yeah. Why no black pope? We don't want one. Then we'll just start something else. The Germans in the 1930s, they were working on a de-Judaized Christendom called German Christendom. It was a bit different from what you would see in Rome today. It's certainly not with, they did away with Latin Mass and then they made it globalistic and so on. And I suppose in a way, since the word Catholicism means universalism, the word Catholicism was coined, of course, in a time when the known world was just Europe and the Mediterranean. And in those days, 2,000 years ago, Northern Africa was full of white people, right? So yeah, Mediterraneans used to be white. I wonder if they still are today, right? Because they've been raped by Arabs. Southern Spain is not white anymore. Southern Italy isn't white anymore, right? So they got raped, right? That happens, right? By the way, did you know where the gypsies are from? A genetic test showed that gypsies in Europe, the Roma, are in fact Indian. They have the Y haplogroup, the male descendants of Indian. And that's because in the time when the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish people, were waging war on Europe, the Ottomans had colonized Bulgaria for 500 years and Hungary for 150 years and so on, and Greece, of course, right? They had colonized Europe. And then you have this Battle of Vienna and the Siege of Vienna, these two big wars, right, around the time of the Dutch author Desiderius Erasmus, who wrote the book on the Turks, De Belli Turcico, on the war with the Turks. And so you have these fights going on in Vienna, but at some point, the Ottomans run out of warriors. So their own warriors are killed off or have fled, run off. And the Ottoman Empire then hired Indian men from India as mercenary soldiers to go and fight the Europeans. They fought us, and they did. And now what you see is in southeastern Bulgaria, there's a ton of that, a large group of people who have that Indian male ancestry, the gypsies, right, the Roma, and so on, right? Because these Indian male soldiers who came to Europe, guess what they did? They raped the European women. But the mixed race children were considered, in those days at least, unwanted. They were discarded. And the survivors of those discarded children became those roaming gypsies. Half Indian, half European, right? This is not a parody. This is historical fact. So I'm going to block you because if you want to be an idiot, you're in the wrong channel. So this is a true story. You know, you can figure it out yourself. It's a true story. The Ottomans hired the Indian mercenaries to fight Europeans, and in the 16th century, they raped European women, and those children, the discarded, the unwanted children, became the roaming gypsies. They became, right, zigeuners, as we say here. Some of these groups of people went all over the place. Now, there's a mystery about the Irish travelers, and they thought initially that the Irish travelers were also these kind of people of Indian descent, but DNA tests actually showed that the Irish travelers are white people. They're Irish people. The British once came to Britain, to Ireland to fight war, to wage war, and a lot of Irish people were moved out of their houses and were later unable to resettle. And they remained travelers. So they became like the gypsies, but they're white. Right. All right. I love the comments. It's a lot of interaction. Yeah. Yeah, they're doing it again now. Well, what's going on in London now? It's the same thing that happened, in the 16th century. You bring in these Indian males, you get a surplus of males and a shortage of females. It's a recipe. It's a recipe for disaster. Yeah? I was really surprised, by the way, about the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He, after 5 days of not saying anything, because the Supreme Court in England decided that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. Everybody already knew that, right? And they said that a man identifying as a woman is still a man, not a woman. And for 5 or 6 days, Keir Starmer said nothing because he was on the side of the trans people, right? And so he has to abide by the Supreme Court's decision that a man is a man, not a woman. And that, trans identifying males who think they're women cannot participate in women's sport, cannot use women's bathrooms. Imagine how sick in your head you have to be, like Keir Starmer, to want men to put on a dress and then enter women's bathrooms and then enter women's sports. To want that and push for that and promote that, but now, of course, get slapped back basically by the Supreme Court. It is so weird. What a weirdo. Like, how can you be so disturbed in your mind that you would ever even think of pushing this onto the common people, right? Luckily, we have some sane people left in the court systems, right? Although not always, because there's all these lower courts who were always preferring the beneficial treatment of the trans crowd, right? So for a very long time, for maybe 20 years in the Western world, the lower courts were all siding with the trans people, saying yes, men can enter women's bathrooms and play in women's sports and take women's prize money, right? Right? And now it's finally overturned by the Supreme Court. Like, Jesus, what took you so long? Why did we even have this at all? Why did this even happen at all? It should never even have happened. It's just so bizarre, right? No, I don't know what vril is. It sounds like viral. Is that what the intended meaning is? You see it sometimes, yeah. So you think England will go with the other Anglo-Saxon countries, yeah. That's a possibility, but you know why that works today? So England and South African English and Australia and so on, it works because of global trade. Without global trade, I think England might become more part of France than you would like. Immigration was a weapon of the elites in the class warfare. Yeah. Definitely. Diverse workplaces, yeah. Unionized less, yeah, where people don't trust each other anymore, yeah. Yeah, it's just such an awful situation, but like I said before, if we change our attitude and we start to believe that there is a future that might even look like something like this, something really awesome, instead of keep doing the same thing over and over, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. There's not even a hint of real progress. It doesn't feel like progress because it isn't progress. These progressive liberals, whatever they preach, is actually called decline. It's decline. We are living in the age of decline, but people get bored with it. And that's the great news, really. The real optimistic message is, if you have too much decline for too long, people are going to get awfully bored with it, and they will start preferring war and conflict to going along on this track. So that's why I started out my video or my live stream talking about the Boomer Leftists, and I sincerely believe if the next 5 to 10 years the Boomer Leftists will be gone, no one will care about their institutions of equality, religious freedom, all of that will be gone out the window. Our societies may collapse, legally speaking, which is only a good thing, because then we can pull out. We can cut loose from this diverse nonsense and all the laws and the international agreements. We could just do away with all of that and start standing up for ourselves again. Yeah. Tony Blair destroyed the UK, yeah. Right. So let's see about all that, yeah. You don't want to be the only white person on the bus anymore, yeah. I've had this experience too in the Netherlands, yeah. I took a bus home after a vacation, but I was the only white person on the bus, yeah. It's really weird. All right. Oh, you're also Dutch. Cool, yeah. Do you oppose mass immigration from Slavic countries into Western Europe? It depends, you know. Maybe I should ask the other question. Will Polish people accept mass immigration of Germans trying to escape diversity? I wonder if you're ready for that. I wonder if Eastern Europe is ready for a mass immigration from Western Europe coming to their countries. Because it could be turned around, right? Right. Do you feel the elites have pivoted to right-wing politics after October 7th when progressive opposed Israel? I don't know about that. I think the elites haven't changed their mind on Israel at all. They have the same attitudes toward it nowadays. Thoughts on the tariff war? Yeah. De-dollarization. Maybe Trump and his team believed that the dollar was so strong that he could play a tariff war. Oh, he overestimated that because the dollar is not that strong. China has been doing something interesting over the past 20 years. You know what they've been doing? The Chinese central bank it has to hold US dollars for trade, of course. But the Chinese central bank has started to also make a collection of all the other currencies of all the other people they trade with. So they have, I don't know, real, and they have whatever, whatever you can think of, any currency. I'm not a currency expert. But what China has done is they've woven a tapestry of international currencies so that one day, if the US dollar clocks out, China can rely on an already existing network, a currency trade network with all the other nations that they have, like the Russian ruble, for example. So China is doing what China has been doing is preparing. They've been preparing for that day. One day they believe the United States, the US dollar will collapse. Right? They've prepared for this. They've set everything in place, and they're just patiently waiting for the US to make the big mistake. And maybe Trump is that mistake. I think Trump should not have started this kind of tariff war, especially since within hours after declaring his largest tariffs on China, he already had to, he blinked. He blinked, right? He chickened out. He was the chicken, and he had to backtrack, right? And that showed the world something, is that China is stronger already. China is stronger not in an aggressive sense, not in a military sense, but in the sense of patience. China has the currency. China can afford to wait it out, to sit it out. And the United States cannot. The United States has to be aggressive. That's why you have Trump, right? Do I have any affinity to the Afrikaner people? Well, I'm Dutch, so yeah, in a way, I can kind of understand Afrikaans. If I listen to it, I can understand what they say, but other than that, I've never been there, so. I don't know if the BRICS will have their own currency, though. It will be more like a patchwork of currencies. They're going to do it in a different way, I think. In 50 years, nobody will live in Europe. Everyone will go to China, the Arab states, and Africa. I think China is an option, but it's possible that modern China will collapse at the same time the modern West will. It might coincide. But yeah, I hope so. I hope that migrants from the global south, the poor people, realize that the wealth of the future may indeed be in China. They should just go there. Go to China. Go to China, yeah. We should promote that, basically. Start promoting immigrants going to China because it's better for you there. There's more wealth, cheaper houses, right? You don't have a wait list for housing, right? You can just get a house right away in the countryside. They have houses waiting for you in China, right? Maybe Chinese girls love diversity, right? So send them there, right? What do you think of white people moving to a sparsely populated place like Argentina? Yeah, Argentina is a bit end of the world thing. For Europeans, yeah, southern Argentina, of course, it's habitable. But you're never going to launch a big white empire from there. If you want, basically, we need to keep Central Europe as ours. We need Austria, Italy, and Germany at the very least, and so on. That because of geopolitics, for strategic reasons, Central Europe is in a position to capture a lot of the trade via the Northern Sea route, via the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, access to the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf with a railroad to Baghdad and so on, and railroads to Russia and through Russia all the way up to China, linking up with the Belt and Road Initiative. Anyway, okay, I'm listing a lot of things here, but the thing is, there's a reason why everybody wants to have Europe, because of its real estate. Geographically speaking, Europe is prime real estate. It is literally situated to do trade with the whole world, to link up with the whole world and rule it, right? This is what they were trying to do with the Holy Roman Empire. This is what the Germans were trying to do with the Second Reich and the Third Reich. They were trying to capture as many as of these trade routes with the world in order to then establish a sort of German-led West Eurasian empire that could have been the most powerful Christian empire in human history. And for thousands of years to come, it would have been almost undefeatable. Right? So that's why everybody else tries to prevent that from ever happening. But who says, never say never, right? Who says it will never happen, right? We can dream. I read Yaki's book Imperium. Yeah, I can't remember all the details, but it was pretty good. But also, he didn't write it with footnotes or something. He wrote most of the book off the top of his head, right? So, like I'm doing a live stream now. Still, it's a good book. Yeah, but for the future, you could also look at like Plato's Republic and turn Europe into sort of Christian Spartan Republic, right, or something like it, or a revival of the Holy Roman Empire. Yeah. What do you think of Thomas Sewell, the Australian, right? Yeah. I sometimes catch some glimpses of what they're doing in Australia with that movement they have, with Joel Davis and some other guys. Yeah, democracy is over. In case you didn't know, why would you give a majority Muslims a vote over your future? We're not going to do that. That's why democracy doesn't work. When you let everyone in, you become the super minority, like 7% of the world. They will just vote for our extinction. We're not going to allow that. We're going to be that Spartan warrior group that makes a stand for itself and wins back freedom. We win back our future. All right? We're going to make a stand. If there's a black pope, I might just go back to Odin or something. Yeah. No, the thing is, we don't have to listen to these big international hierarchies. You know, if something is not to our liking, we could just walk out. And that should be our attitude from now on. If we don't like the United Nations, we get out of there. We don't like a Roman Church with a black pope, we just get the hell out of there. But then we do what we want. It's never, you know, in history, basically, history is a story of strong men using violence to do whatever they want, and using their intelligence, of course, to prevent counterattacks and so on, right? So you use your intelligence, you use deception, but ultimately, force is based on violence, always has been, always will be. But you hide your violence, you hide your intentions, of course, right? You use some deception to get what you want, right? But ultimately, it's violence. You know? They better make a movie about us. Yeah. I have not heard about this assassination of Traore, but I will look into it. Yeah. Because I'm reading some books about the colonization of Africa, how they really did it, and so on. So I'm gonna, look into all those matters. Yeah. All right. All right. All right. All right. I'm gonna log off now, and I'm gonna wish you a great, pleasant evening because it's almost 10 p.m. here or so. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time. I'm gonna keep doing live streams regularly, but only when I have something to say. Right? So then I will. I can do some monologues, and then I can do some self promotion. I've got a Substack at jmk.info. I'll type it out for you. Yeah. And you can follow me on Twitter X at JohannesMKX, or you can go to my YouTube at The Great Johannes. So I'll see you there, and bye bye. Have a nice evening.